Ciao friends! In this video we will write the DAX code to solve a business question. We want to see the amount of sales made by a specific group of customers before and after a certain period. The idea that comes from one of the many questions we receive in videos and articles, the business question is we want to analyze what happened to a group of customers that made a specific purchase in a particular month. We want to see the sales 6 months before that month and 6 months after that month. This could be the idea for the launch of a new product or for a particular promotion or many other events that you want to analyze this way. Actually, this is a variation of the like-for-like DAX pattern, but in this case we're going to be more specific for a particular report, and we will see step by step how to write the DAX code to solve the business problem. So let's start with a demo. I prepared a report where we have the sales amount divided by month, and we create a selection of a particular brand of products. So the idea is that we are analyzing the sales made for Contoso products in each month. What we want to do is we want to retrieve only for the customers who bought some Contoso product in May 2017, which is the cell that I'm highlighting now. We want to see the amount of sales for all the products only of those customers in the 180 days before May 2017 and after May 2017, in the 6 months after that. So because we want to be flexible, we created a slicer here with a number, in this case 180, and this will be the parameter. So if instead of 6 months we want to analyze only 3 months, we will just change this number to 90, for example. But let's move back to 180 and let's start writing the code. As you see, I prepared the report using two measures that now are just blank. We want to see in a specific measure the sales made for all the products, not just the brand selected, before the days that I selected, and the amount of sales after that. But remember, only for those customers that made some purchase in this month for the product selected. So this is the business condition we want to use as a filter in the pre-sale sold products and post-sale sold products. So if I start with the pre-sale sold product measure, you see that at the beginning I started with blank just to create the initial shape of the report I want to create. And the first thing I can do, I can just copy the value of sales amount, and this will produce exactly the copy. Let me move this here. Exactly the copy of the measure sales amount here. What we want to do, we want to change the filters for this measure by doing what? We want to change the period, the date. We want to change the customer selected, or actually we want to keep only those customers that are in the current selection, but that made some purchase. Currently the customers are not filtered. And we want to extend the selection of products, including all the products. So let's start writing a calculate statement that should implement all the conditions that we want to satisfy here. We said, okay, we want to remove the filter from the product table. So this is the first action we certainly want to do. And then we want to change the filter for the customers. So because we want to change the filter for the customer table, we want to remove any filter we might have for the customer. And so, for example, I can remove the filter from the customer table. This could be not strictly necessary, but let's say that we want to make sure that we don't have any other filter involving the report for the customer, because we want to include a filter customers, that we will write in a variable before this calculate. So let's call this target customers, because we want to create a list of the customers that are the target for our analysis. And we want this list of the customer to replace any existing filter over the customer. For this reason, we remove the filter from the customer table and we include a target customer filter, which we have to write. I'm just starting to create the shape of the calculation I want to obtain. And after that, we said, okay, the other element we want to change the time. Because we know that if we apply a filter over the date column in the date table, we will automatically remove the existing filter for the date table. We don't need to write remove filters date if we know that we're going to overwrite another filter with the date column of the date table. And so let's say that we want to create a filter period table that will filter only the 6 months before the event. Now, because I like to use variables, I want to store this result in a variable called result, and I will return this at the end. So this is the way I write a code, because if I need to inspect the value of a variable before the last one, I will simply change this var result at the end, and I will restore var result before I confirm the measure in my report. Now, we know that we have to write two variables. One is called target customers, and we have to write something here, and the other is filter period. Filter period. Okay. Okay, let's go. So let's start with the customers. The customers we want to filter are those customers that made a purchase in that month. Now, we could write this condition in many ways. We could write a filter iterating over the customer where sales amount is greater than 0. And for example, this could be written this way, but it is not a particularly efficient way to write this filter, because this would iterate customer by customer, creating the sales amount in a temporary table, and this would be very, very expensive. So because we actually don't want to see the actual amount of sales for each customer, we just want to know whether the customer made a single transaction, because we know that the sales amount measure is a measure that is actually aggregating data from the sales table. Just the presence of some transaction in the sales table is enough to consider that the customer made a purchase, made a transaction in that month. So another way to obtain what we want is using the summarize function. Summarize can aggregate the rows in the sales table grouped by the customer name. So why I'm using the customer name, not the customer key? Because this is a more flexible way, because I want to show something that you might want to use in other scenarios. Let's say that if instead of locating the customer by name, we could group the customer by city. So for example, I want to see of the sales made in this city in that month, what was the amount of sales 6 months before and 6 months after that? Because, for example, you made a particular promotion in the city and not for the specific customers. So these are ideas that could be useful. The result of this summarize will be just a list of customer names, and because we are going to remove any filter from the customer table, what we get is the list of the customer names that have transactions in that period. So this is also a way to get, for example, if the customer has different rows in the customer table, but the same name, assuming that the name is unique for the customer, but you might have different versions of the customer, this also includes all the previous versions of the customer in case you have a slowly changing dimension of type 2. But this is just a detail. So the idea is that we have a column from the customer table that only has the list of the customers that have transactions in the current filter context. So for each month, for example here, April 2018, we have only a few customers that made purchases for this amount. And what about the period? Well, we want to retrieve a range of dates, right? And the range of dates is usually something we can easily obtain by using the dates between, specifying the date column of the date table we want to filter, and specifying the range of dates. So what is the range of dates? We know that we have a variable that has the number of days we want to include in the period. Now I selected 180, and this is another information I prefer to store in a variable at the beginning. So let's call this period days. And the name of the measure that retrieved the value from the slicer we have seen at the beginning is this days value that I created in advance. So I have this number, now is 180, it could be a different number if the user changes the slicer. And we can use this value to create the range of dates. Now we know that in this between we have to provide the first and the last day of the period, and these 2 days are included in the range of dates. So what I want to do is, because we want to go before, I can go at the beginning of the period selected, and then I can go back the amount of days I want to include in the period. What does it mean? If I have a date that I can call first date of period, and let's say that if I have a month selected, this will be the first day of the month. I still have to understand how to write it, but I want to subtract from this date 180 days. And so I use here period days. So the first day will be 180 days before the beginning of the current month in my report, and the last one will be just the day before the first day of the current period. So the last day of the period is the day before the beginning of the month I'm currently seeing in my report, so -1. Once I do this, I still have to write this variable, first date of period. So the first date of period, which will be a variable, will be the first day in the current filter context. And what is the best way to retrieve that date? Using the minimum value of the date column in the date table. This is the faster way to retrieve this, this value. We don't use first date, which is a table function that is unnecessary here. We want a value, not a table. And so it's absolutely not necessary to use first date. It's better to use min, because it's a faster and simpler function to retrieve just the value of the first day. And this way we created the range that we need here. So let's see if this calculation works. And you see that we have, in many months we have blank, which means that we don't have sales for the customer that made a purchase of Contoso in 2017, also because this is the first month of the period. But if we go, for example, in 2019, we see that we have 6 months of transactions before, but the customer who made a purchase in February 2019 never bought any product in the previous 6 months. What about the post sales? Well, the post sales will be a very similar structure of the measure. So we can copy the code we wrote here, and we can use the same structure in the post sales all products. So I pasted this code, but I have to apply a few changes. For example, instead of starting from the beginning of the period, I want to start from the end of the period, and I want to add 180 days. So this will be the last date of period, which is a max of date. So I get the last date of the current month in the report, for example. I don't change the target customers, because the target customers is the table that has a list of customer names that bought something in the current month. But the filter period will be different, because I want to start from the day after the current period, and I want to end, sorry, not minus, but plus, so the day after that, and I sum here the period days variables, which is currently is 180. I don't change anything else, because the logic is the same. I still want to compute sales amount, replacing a few filters from the filter context. I want to remove the filter from product. I want to replace customer with the list of customers that are in the target. I want to replace the dates with the period that in this case is not before, but is after the current period. So I didn't change anything else, only the filter period variable. So I confirm this, and here we see that now we have the sales before, the sales after. Is still working if I change this? Let's try. So if I change this slider, I expect these numbers to be smaller because I'm restricting the period. I have a shorter period, so the sales made could be smaller. But if I use a larger number, you will see that these numbers tend to increase because I'm considering more transactions before and after the period. So in this example, we have seen how to compute the calculation for all the products sold before and after the period considered, even though we selected a particular brand of products. But we might have a slightly different requirement. We want to see the sales made for the same brand of products and for the other product brands 180 days before, 180 days after the period selected. So in this case, we need not just one, we need two measures before and two measures after. So my pre-sales will display the sales made in the 180 days before the period for the same brand. In pre-other, I want to see the sales of the other brands. So in this case, I slightly change the measure I created here. So I start with the pre-sales all products. Let me just reduce this a little bit so I can see the entire calculation. And I can copy this in the pre-sales for just the products of the same brand. Because if you think about the problem, if I want to retrieve the sales of the same brand, the only thing I have to do, I have to keep the filter for the product. So here I can just remove the line with remove filters product, because this way I say whatever selection of products I made so far, I keep the same selection in the current filter context. I'm not touching the selection of the products in pre-sales. So when I click enter, I see that this is populating the values here. And of course, if I change the days, this will work in a similar way, increasing the value or decreasing the value. And of course, this also depends on the products I select and on the brands of products I select and on the period. So let's restore 180 here and let's compute pre-other. So how can we compute pre-other? Well, in this case, so pre-other is this measure. So let me check, because probably I prepared this with another name. So pre-sales other products. I just shortened the name in the report. Now this is just a blank. And now I have two choices. I could just create a complex filter that gets all the products, subtracting the products that are in the current filter context. Or, because I already have in my report the calculation of the two measures, I could try to reuse those calculations and just creating the difference between the two measures. So I want to compute now pre-other, and pre-other is a name for a longer measure, which is the pre-sales other products. So pre-sales other products is here. And here I can compute just the difference between the sales amount, the pre-sales that I computed in the previous demo. So pre-sales all products. And I remove from this amount the pre-sales I just computed in the previous measure. So the sales made in the previous period for the same selection of products. So if I do this, I obtain the number here. But in this case, you see that if I have a number minus this number and the result is 0, I see this 0. That could be something I don't want to see. So how can I improve the visualization of this? Well, I could store this result in a variable. So let's say delta is equal to this difference. And then I can compute the result, removing the 0 and transforming the 0 into a blank if I detect that the result is 0. And one technique we can use to do this operation in a very efficient way without using a conditional if statement is by dividing the value that I have by just condition that is true false, because if the condition is false, is transformed into 0, and the division by 0 by default returns blank. So if delta is different than 0, then the result is 1. So I divide delta by 1, and so I get the same result of delta. But if delta is 0, actually what happens is that the result of this division will be blank, and I return the result. It's just a slightly more efficient way to do an if statement if you want. And if I do this, you see that this number 0 disappears. Of course, I can do the same for the post calculation. So post-sales calculation. So the post-sales calculation will be similar to the post-sales all products. I copy this in the clipboard. So I got the post-sales all products I created before, and I copy this in the clipboard. I go in post-sales and I replace this blank with the same calculation, but I just don't remove the filter here. I click this, it works. Hopefully, let's take a look, and it is working. And I do the same for the post-sales other products. And in this case, I can copy the condition that I created here. I will just replace the two measure references using the post measure references instead of the pre-measure references. So post and post here. And this should already work. Here we go. So this way we manipulated the filter context so that with minimal changes in the final calculate in the result, so this calculation here. So what we did, we played with the filters that are replacing the filter that we remove, and we removed or not removed filters over product and customer in order to control the group of customers and products that we wanted to filter in our measures. So we have seen that when we define specific business requirements, we have to transform these business requirements in changes that we apply to the filter context in order to execute the same measure we used at the beginning. The sales amount has been simply computed in different filter contexts to obtain the values that we wanted to see. We also have seen a technique to change the visualization of 0 into a blank in a more efficient way using divide. Small trick to improve the performance. Enjoy DAX.